Welcome to Play Therapy Community Podcast, providing connection, information, and inspiration to child therapists all around the world. Here's your host, a licensed psychotherapist, a registered play therapist, and my mom, Jackie Flynn.
This episode is brought to you by Jackie Flynn Consulting. I provide consultation to EMDR therapists seeking support with challenging cases, desiring to hone their skills, or working towards certification. As a registered play therapist and an EMDR consultant in training, helping clinicians that work with children and adolescents is at the heart of my work. If you're already trained in EMDR therapy and you'd like some consultation support on how to use it best with kids, or specifically how to integrate it with play therapy techniques while still holding true to all 8 phases of EMDR with fidelity, go to my website, Jackie Flynn Consulting, to schedule an appointment. I have a free download of a body scan PDF that I use with my child clients when we target somatic sensations in the body. You can find that at JackieFlynnConsulting.com as well. Now back to our episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Play Therapy Community Podcast. Well, today's episode is real special to me. I have one of my dear friends on here that I met in grad school, and I absolutely adore her. Her name is Jill Aller, and she's an adoption consultant for a Step Ahead Adoption Services, and she's an adoptive mom of 2 beautiful children, ages 6 and 4. Jill has her BA in psychology and a master's degree in teaching and an EdS degree in counseling. That's where I met her, was at University of Central Florida. She adopted her 2 children through the help of a Step Ahead Adoption Services and had such a great experience with them that she went back to work for them 4 years ago. Both children have very open adoptions where they are still in touch with their biological families. Jill has lived all over the United States, but is now happily settled in Florida with her extended family. Jill is passionate about helping others navigate their adoption journeys in a mindful, balanced way. Jill, thank you so much for being on the show. I love you.
Oh, Jackie, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be, talking to you and about a topic that we both are touched by and love so much.
Yes. And I'm excited to get this information out to everybody. Our listeners are combined of, there's a lot of therapists, a lot of educators, and a lot of parents listening to this. So let's just jump right in. Today we're talking about the language of adoption, and I remember when I had the idea for this episode, I consulted with you on a case that I was having, and I had some questions, and it was kind of a difficult situation, and I wanted to reach out to someone who knew, and that was you. And one thing you mentioned in that consultation conversation was the language of adoption. How you speak to kids and how you describe things is really, really key. So why is that important, and what does that mean, the language of adoption?
Right. It is, I think language in every topic area in life is important, but the language that we use to talk about something helps shape the way we think about it, and especially the way that children think about it. When children are our listeners, they kind of absorb not just the language we use, but the feeling that language reflects, and that becomes their inner voice about adoption. And the way that we think about something is reflected in the language that we use. And so I think, for a lot of people, you'll hear them say, oh, she gave up her baby for adoption, or why did she give up the kids for adoption? And it sounds like a rejection.
Yeah.
And so that's just kind of one of the more common phrases that you can turn into a positive phrase by saying that, she placed the baby for adoption, or she made an adoption plan. That's kind of the biggie in adoption language that we try to get all our clients to use when they're talking about adoption, to focus more on the good intentions of the birth mom, to find a loving family. rather than making it sound like a rejection.
Yes. And I know just as you said that, I did like a check-in with how that felt in my body and my heart. And it just feels loving and nurturing. And I could imagine if I was the person that was involving directly, I was the adoptee, it would make a huge difference in how you viewed the whole situation.
Yes. And I think, I like for my children to um, hear us talk about adoption in an active voice rather than as a label or an adjective. So you'll hear a lot of people say they're adopted, and that's okay. A lot of people say it, and some people think that's fine. But my personal preference has evolved into saying we adopted them instead of saying they're adopted. So it's not so much a label that's on the children, or that sounds like it's something that's just about them. Saying we adopted them kind of puts it in an active voice, puts a focus on us and the intentional action that we did to, make them a part of our family.
Oh my goodness.
It just kind of, has a positive focus.
Yes, that's so beautiful. Are there any other like phrases, common phrases, or things that you can think of that maybe you say to your kids or you direct those that you work with to change their language?
Oh, yes. When we start working with clients, we try to, help them kind of reframe how they think about adoption and the language that they use, because they'll be talking directly to birth parents and to people who work with birth parents all the time. So one of the phrases that you definitely want to change is you'll hear people say the real mom or the real dad or the real kids. And what they mean is biological, or they might also say your natural mom or dad. And so we just kind of encourage people to use the term your birth family or your first family or your biological family. And so I think if you're a therapist that's working with the child, you have to kind of know what that family uses. It'll be really individualized. And you would want to find out what the parents use to talk to their children. What kind of phrases do they use to refer to the birth family? And especially, this will evolve as the child gets older. So for my children who are 4 and 6 right now, we use the term tummy mommy, meaning that you grew in her tummy. And they can't comprehend a lot beyond that yet. And so that will evolve into something more mature, like biological mom or my birth mom, as they get older and they can understand what that means. But right now we just say your tummy mommy, and kind of explain that you grew in her tummy and she placed you with us as your forever family. So you have a birth family or a first family, and then you have a forever family or an adoptive family. And those are just kind of more positive, And then, of course, the usual, instead of put up for adoption or give up for adoption, you want to say that she placed for adoption, or that she made an adoption plan.
Oh, I love that. It's so accepting, so just so nurturing and loving.
Yeah,
Like in the
that's
best
really,
interest of the child.
right. And it is really the bottom line that connects all of the people involved in adoption, are connected by love. And so even though it is a painful process for all involved, it's pain that's entered into willingly, out of love. And that is an incredible thing.
Oh, boy. Yes. Wow. Well said. Any other phrases that comes to mind that people could kind of have either jotted down or in their memory bank for when these situations come up?
Definitely. When you're talking to someone who is an adoptive parent, a lot of people want to say something positive about the fact that you're an adoptive parent. And so they'll usually say something along the lines of, "Oh, she's so lucky to have you as her parent." And they mean that in a positive way. Um, but sometimes it can be construed as the adoptive family somehow saved the child. And you just kind of want to avoid implying that that the biological family was somehow not suitable or not preferable, because really it was an intentional choice on all from all parties. And so you can say, "Oh, I see, I'm so happy for you and your family," or I see how much you love each other, and it's so wonderful to see you together." Things like that. They're just a little bit more neutral, instead of saying like, "Oh, a lot of times people say, 'Oh, you're such good people. I just couldn't raise someone else's child.'" Or, "Oh, it's so good of you to adopt someone else's child." And those are they're well meant, they're well intentioned phrases, but they really convey the wrong message to the child, and sometimes to the adoptive parent too. So you just want to say something more neutral that's very focused on the love that is, between the adoptive parents and the adoptive child, and just say like, "Oh, it's so great to see you as a family," something like that.
Oh, I love that. And I know you're speaking definitely from like the supportive person's point of view, but also from a very personal perspective, being a mom yourself and really kind of knowing what that feels like on a personal level.
Yeah, and I think it's people want to believe that adoption is kind of a fairy tale, because you see the stories on TV or whatever, and it's told in 21 minutes, so it ends up looking like, wow, that was wonderful. But everybody in the process is really dealing with some grief, and the child, as they get older, will be feeling some grief even in the best adoption situation. So you don't want to be an outsider who's saying that it's so you're so much better off with your adoptive parents, because that sends a message of kind of rejection of the birth family. There just needs to always be some kind of honoring of the birth family, and then and then letting the child process how they feel about the birth family, because there's going to be negative feelings for the adoptive parents and the birth parents. And I think that the adoptive child needs to be the one to kind of set the tone for how they feel at each stage of their development, and then kind of process that.
Sure. Yeah. And I could imagine, we're definitely kind of focusing on children, but I have many adult clients that are adoptee, and they feel they've heard that language or maybe use that language currently. It could be really helpful for them to kind of change the way that they communicate around this, so that they could feel those positive feelings as well.
Yeah, that is really important. And I think, for grown-up adoptees, adult adoptees, to be able to say that, yeah, it's great, and it also hurts. I think it's hard as an outsider. You want to know more about the adoption, but there's usually feelings all along the continuum of grief to happiness. And so the best thing you can do is to just, if you want to be able to talk about it with someone who is adopted, is to ask open-ended questions. What's it like to be an adult adoptee? Or, how has your life changed? And some adults are just now finding out they're adopted, and they're, 50 years old. And so, luckily, adoption is changing more toward openness, but the generation that's like the baby boomers, there was a lot of closed adoption. And so there's a lot of shame and grief surrounding just being an adoptee, which hopefully these next few generations won't have to deal with as much, not as much secrecy and mystery
Yes.
in the current generation, hopefully.
That's such a good point. And when you say that, it's like really not pretending that there's not pain there. I mean, really honoring that this does hurt. Part of it does hurt, and allowing people to express that in a real safe, accepting way, and not pretending like everything's, just beautiful fairy tale. There is some pain and grief involved.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think that's important.
I love the shifts that it's taken over the years. And I think, and I didn't plan to ask you this, but I think it would be helpful to kind of explain what open adoption is. I know some people may not be familiar with exactly what that means.
Yeah, sure. So you have anything along a continuum of closed to open. And so right in the middle, there's something called semi-open adoption. And I would say the definitions aren't real black and white, but closed adoption is where the adoptive parents and the birth parents don't know each other. And they may not know anything about each other. They may know a first name. And then you have semi-open adoption, where they might know a little bit about each other, but they can always communicate through a third party, which would be the agency or the attorney that facilitated the adoption. So they might send pictures or letters, but they always send it through a third party. So there's no exchange of personal information. And then open adoption can take lots of forms. It might be that you know each other's names, and you might set up there's a lot of social media now that's available for adoption, where you can set up a social media site that is just for birth parents. So it's almost like a Facebook. So there's something called Child Connect, and I can have a little web page that only the birth parents can access, and I can share all kinds of pictures and videos and stories there. And so we know a little bit about each other, and that's considered open. And we may have some contact right at birth in the hospital, or we may have ongoing visits, as long as the child is okay with it. So I would say the definition of open is very flexible, but it does involve direct communication between the birth parents and the adoptive family.
Oh, I love that.
Makes sense?
Yes. It sounds like it definitely has evolved over the decades.
Yeah. Yes. And I think that's, good for reducing the shame that used to surround adoption. And, I think that the research shows that openness is a little healthier for the mental and emotional health of the birth family, especially, and of the child themselves. But it's not to say that openness is the answer for everyone in every adoption, because there are a lot of painful situations in adoption, or some adoptive children or adults don't really have that desire to connect with the birth family, and they may never have that desire, and so that's okay. It has to be individualized for each adoption situation.
Yeah, that's important to know. It's not a one size fits all. It's definitely different needs for different situations.
Right, that's true, and it can evolve as the child grows.
Yeah. Now, I know we have a lot of therapists listening to the show. What are some tips that you have for therapists working with families that are involved in adoption in some way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that, we talked about grief, and I think it's important for a therapist to always allow some work on grief or loss, allow the adoptee and the adoptive family to express, some anger, even if they feel happy and well adjusted in their adopted family. Just kind of allowing that to be there. So even while you're focusing on using the positive language surrounding adoption, it needs to be also realistic. and realized that even the happiest adoptions still involve some pain. So the three parties that are involved in adoption are called the adoption triad.
Mm-hmm.
We have a birth family, a child, and an adoptive family. And a book I read when I was an adoptive parent, before I was an adoptive parent, it's called 20 Things Adopted Kids Wish Their Adoptive Parents Knew by
Mm-hmm.
Sherry Eldridge.
Mm-hmm.
And she talked about how important it is for adoptive parents to recognize that everyone in the triad is grieving some kind of a loss.
Yeah.
And so I would say a therapist, would need to just recognize that as well. So the birth family is grieving the child they placed, obviously, and they're feeling guilt about not being able to parent the child, wondering what the child will think of them. And then you have the child who's grieving the loss of their biological family, or maybe they don't know anything about their parents, or they have no medical history. Maybe they're feeling rejected. Maybe they're an adult and they've just found out, now they feel lied to for their whole lives by the adoptive
Mm-hmm.
family. And so they're struggling with that kind of a loss.
Yeah.
And then the adoptive parents, are the third piece of the triad, they could be grieving, a biological child they'll never have, or the ability to experience pregnancy, or grieving for babies that were miscarried or adoptions that failed. I think a therapist would want to just be mindful of that there is some pain underlying the adoption, and that it would be good to help the person process that so they can come out on the other side with some healthy, language to use about it, and feeling like they don't have to hide that part, even if they're happy about their current adoption, or, their adoptive family.
Mm-hmm.
That it's okay to also feel a little bit of anger or grief.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Boy, I think that piece right there is the most valuable part. It's okay to feel whatever comes up in this, and it's a safe space to share those feelings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And hopefully, I would say the second tip for therapists would be something I heard from Dr. Jeff LeClure, and he's a therapist. He's also an adoptee himself, and he begged adoptive families to go to therapy as a family, as a whole group, so that you're not sending the message that so when he would see a child come to therapy by themselves, that the child is there as the client, then that kind of implies that the child needs therapy because there's something wrong with them, or they feel singled out for being adopted, like that's something they have to deal with. But when families come as a group, then the child is just part of the network of people who are there for some support, and they're recognizing that everybody's lives in the group have been affected by adoption, and everyone has some role to play in building positive relationships for the family.
Oh my goodness, that's wonderful. Oh, these are such great tips. I'm definitely going to implement that one. That's a great way to explain it to families too, it sounds like.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it's hard to, I think it's also important to have time alone with the child if that's in the best interest of the child. So maybe they do need some time to process on their own, or, just be with the therapist on their own. And if they're feeling bad about talking about sad feelings about adoption, they don't want the adoptive parents to feel bad. So, to allow for that kind of space as well, but to recognize that the entire family would benefit from, being in therapy together as a support network for each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think ideally it'd be good to have family and individual, and maybe even some parenting support through like child-parent relationship therapy or something like that in an ideal
situation. Yes.
I know, unfortunately, there's a lot of limitations in some situations of, what insurance will pay for or what funding is available and time. But really kind of addressing all of those areas could be so valuable.
Right. And I think if you start with the idea of, best practice, and then you just work within the parameters of insurance and time and transportation issues, and you just, shoot for something that's as close to best practice as you can get.
Yes. Yes. Any more tips for therapists working with adoptive families?
I think that you definitely just want to have all kinds of resources, as many as you can have available to the whole family. So you can refer the family to adoption support groups where kids can meet peers who share adoption as part of their story, and parents can, identify with other adoptive parents. So there's a nationwide organization called Resolve, and their website's resolve.org. And they are a great adoption support group and a great source of education and information. And you can start from there and find a local adoption support group. And I would say to kind of know why you're going to a support group. So, some people get a little defensive and say, well, what exactly do I need support for? I mean, that is being adopted wrong. But I think that with any support group, any topic you're dealing with, it's really just healthy to meet other people in the same situation and share your stories with people who know exactly what it's like. So you don't have to do the explaining that you would do to someone who's coming from outside of adoption. And I think it's like that with everything that people struggle with and go to support groups for. And the good thing nowadays is that online support groups are available and are, everywhere. You can live anywhere and find an online group where you can chat and you can, meet in person when possible. But I think they have so many groups now that can connect people who are at the same stage of adoption. And so that's kind of cool. So you might have adoptive parents who are just starting, or you might have adoptive parents who are raising teenagers. So that's kind of a neat way to look for specific peer groups that you can chat with and say, and, kind of share tips. Like, how did you handle this?
Yeah.
When your child asked this question.
And online has
the sharing of ideas.
Yeah, so normalizing, and online has such a nice feel. I know some people definitely prefer in person, and that's really nice too. But, regardless of format, being able to normalize it and be in the presence of other people that really get it, that is so therapeutic.
Oh, yeah.
It's so healing.
Yeah.
And I love online. I love online counseling and I love online groups, just because somebody in Iceland can meet with someone in California and then somebody in Florida, and they can be together where before they may not have been able to connect and share this. But the world of technology allows that. So I've only really had good experiences with that.
Yeah, I think that's going to be something that's really valuable in the future too, for connecting people who, there are often transportation issues or just timing and scheduling issues. And when there's an online group, they're kind of there all the time. So you can, pop on and ask a question at midnight and you'll see in the morning someone answered your message. And so that's really powerful, as just kind of like being able to live with each other on a daily basis rather than have 1 hour a week you spend together.
Yes, live with each other without the actual annoyance of living with each other.
Of living with each other. That's so true.
I love groups. Groups are so,
oh, yeah.
I don't know, there's just a healing power, whether it's a support group or a psychoeducational group where you're learning stuff, or a therapy group where you're really really going through that therapeutic process, it could transform you in a way that individual can't really access, because I think we're just social beings. And when we're in the presence of someone else that truly can relate to how we feel, and we feel felt by that person, it can heal your heart. It can really, really help
Yes,
provide clarity and healing and all kinds of beautiful stuff that can, make this
yes,
process easier.
you're right. There's so much validation there, just being in the presence of other people who are just, you know, walking the same path that you're walking.
Mm.
And I think you also get to take on the role of, a lot of times people find themselves being helpful to someone else in the
Yes.
group, and that's empowering to realize that, oh, my story isn't something that is negative in my life that I have to deal with. It's actually something that just turned this guy's perspective around, and
Mm.
I was helpful to him because I have this experience, and
My goodness, that's
that's powerful.
beautiful. Yeah, feeling like you made a difference in somebody else's experience is amazing, which is what you're doing now. I know just reaching out to you for consultation as a therapist, like before this, and just knowing you as a colleague and a person has been really helpful to me. But I'm excited to get this information out to the world so that people can really use it and help make lives better.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to do that. And November was National Adoption Month. And so hopefully, this will come at a time when people are having adoption fresh on their minds from seeing
Yes.
something, some adoption story or news piece. And unfortunately, adoption gets a lot of negative press because you only hear about it when there's something that goes wrong. And so
Mhm.
people are kind of terrified about it, and they misunderstand a lot about it. And so it's real important. And I'm real appreciative of you giving, time and space for some positive and helpful adoption information.
Oh yeah, so I'm real appreciative of you, and I'm a huge fan of yours. So it's important to mention that at the time of this recording, it's mid-November, so we're definitely recording during this month, but it may not air until December. But I think the information is like always relevant. Um,
Definitely.
Regardless of
Yes.
when everyone's listening. So we're almost out of time. You mentioned a couple of resources. I'm going to put these resources in the show notes at playtherapycommunity.com. Do you have any more resources that you'd like to recommend? I remember you recommended a family book to me that I bought. It's a real colorful book
Oh,
about different types of.
I love it. Yes, and it's a great book to start with. Any age can read it, but it's called The Family Book by
Mhm.
Todd Parr, and he has a lot of great books for kids, and a lot of his books focus on diversity. And so this family book it's about adoption without being solely about adoption. So it mentions adoption as one of the possible ways that you can be a family. And I like that because it's not a focus on adoption as, um, something weird and different. It's just kind of like some families have two moms, some families have two dads, or some families have one parent instead of two, and some families adopt children. And some families look like each other, some families look like their pets. It just is kind of it's a great book for little ones about diversity of families, because I know with my kids, they have kids in their classes or in their schools who come from all different kinds of families. So regardless of what you believe, your children are, having in their peer groups these other children who are coming from really diverse kinds of family backgrounds. And so it's great initial exposure to just kind of read through that book. And it's silly too.
Yeah, it's
And
beautiful
so
too.
it's
It really
fun.
catches their attention.
Yeah, and he does another one a lot of people like that. It's called It's Okay to Be Different.
Oh,
And yeah, and so that mentions adoption as well. And I think I like Adoptive Families magazine. If a therapist could have that in their waiting room or something as an ongoing resource. But uh, it's a good compilation of lots of resources from all over the country. And then there's also the Center for Adoption Support and Education. So the acronym is CASE, CASE. And that
mhm.
has a lot of great educational materials. And as well as the National Council for Adoption, which is at adoptioncouncil.org. That's a great source of education and resources as well. And then, of course, I would direct you to estepaheadadoption.com, which is the website of the consulting company that I work with, and they're the ones who helped us adopt our children. A Step Ahead is just nationwide, so we have consultants all over the country, and we help adoptive parents to navigate the adoption process, because the agencies or attorneys who do adoption their job is really to be there for the birth mom, and that's important. But then there's nobody there for the adoptive parents,
Mhm.
just to advise and educate and advocate for them, and help them be educated consumers of the process as well, to to build their family in a healthy way.
Mhm.
And so a step ahead adoption.com, and then we have some great resources on there as well. And I think thanks to Google, you can find tons of great stuff out there
Yeah,
on
there's a lot of
adoption. And
resources.
yeah, oh yes, and
Yeah.
I would welcome anyone to contact me as well if they just want kind of referrals or have questions. I'm passionate about it and personally touched by adoption and very grateful for it. So I'm always happy to talk with people.
Oh, I love it. I want to mention a few of my favorite books too that I have in my office. The Tell Me Again About the Night I Was Born by Jamie Lee Curtis. Have you heard of
Oh,
that one?
yes.
Yeah, I
That's
love
so
her.
cute. Yes.
Yeah, really good stuff. And then A Mother for Choco. I remember I had bought that book like years ago, maybe like at a garage sale or something. And I read it to my
Hmm.
kids when they were little. And I wasn't a therapist then. And I was, in an entirely different field. And now that book has so much different meaning to me. It's just a beautiful book about how people can look different, but still be family. I love that book, Mother
Yes.
Coco by
That's
Phil
that's a
Crowder.
really popular one. Hmm.
There's another one,
And
Tell Me a Real Adoption Story. That one's good too. I can't remember the author.
tell me a real adoption story.
Yeah, yeah. It's just like a little book. I think it's like orange. I should have more
Oh,
information. I'll put a
check it
link
out.
to it in the show notes. I'll look it up. And ABC
Yeah.
Adoption and Me is one that I find helpful too. I think though
Oh,
what
yes.
the most, that you sit down and read these books with kids and they're like, oh, that's like me, or it normalizes it kind of like a group would. But just being present with the kids and the family and everybody involved in allowing them to feel what they're feeling and being supportive, I think that's the biggest thing that helps.
Oh, yes, for sure. I think that just allowing it to be talked about, which is something previous generations didn't always do, has been has been a great change for adopted children in this generation and hopefully future generations. And there's another book I wanted to mention called The Tummy Mummy by
Oh,
Michelle Madrid Branch, and it's kind of it's a book about adoption from the tummy mommy's perspective,
hmm,
which is interesting. It's for little kids, so it's accessible, and it just talks about the love that is between a birth parent and an adoptive parent, and doesn't get real into detail. So it's okay to, help kids process who the tummy mommy is. But again, I think with anything, you have to just, your family and kind of where you are in talking about the adoption story. And I think it's good for parents to just kind of, maybe check it out at the library or online first and see what fits with where your child is in understanding adoption.
Yeah, I just Googled it. I'm going to order that. That seems like that could really kind of, if it fits in what people feel comfortable with, seems like it could really bring back the love and the connection and the placed for adoption, or set it up in a way that felt positive and loving. And I know,
Yes.
I'm going to order that right after we get off of this interview. Thank you. I love all the research. You're such a good person to know in this. And I know if people haven't listened yet to my episode 14, I have an episode on meeting my sister that I just met in recent years, a few years back, and her name is Melissa, and it's titled "Meeting My Sister Melissa: Our Story of Love, Adoption, and Connection." So it shares a very personal.
Yes, that's a great one.
Oh, thank you.
I loved it. That was a very moving episode.
Oh, thank you, Jill. I know that was one. I think out of everything, that's my favorite one. I met her right before my mom died, and my mom had a chance to meet her, and it's just one of the most beautiful things I've felt in my whole life was meeting her. She's just an amazing person, and I feel really, really fortunate to have her in my life. So
I'm sure she feels the same.
Oh, thank you. Is there anything that we didn't mention that you feel like would be helpful for people to know? Or do you think we covered it all?
I think we covered it. And yes, and we'll have the resources online for people to kind of dig into a little further if they want.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jill. And for those of you who are listening, you can find the show notes for this episode at playtherapycommunity.com. If you haven't done so yet, join our private Facebook group, Play Therapy Community. And also there's a Facebook page, Play Therapy Community, hosted by Jackie Flynn. You could just do a search for that. There's a Twitter, Jackie Flynn at RPT for Registered Play Therapist. And you can also find us on Pinterest. And I really appreciate you being here, Jill, and I appreciate everyone who's listening. It means the world to me.
Thank you so much for the chance to talk about adoption in a positive way. And feel free to check out A Step Ahead Adoption on Facebook as well. And I look forward to questions.
All right. Bye, Jill.
Thank you, Jackie. Bye.
To join our growing community for free, just go to playtherapycommunity.com and find us on Facebook too.
Thanks for listening to the Play Therapy Community Podcast. Until next time, bye-bye.